She was on her knees in the dirt, not praying, screaming her son was gone, taken in the night. And the woman who took him was sleeping peacefully 2 floors above her, in silk sheets, in a room full of candles, laughing at the kind of power that comes from owning a man's secrets. But what Duchess Page did not know, what she could not have predicted, was that the man she thought she owned had finally decided that his soul was worth more than his title. And what happened next shook every drawing room, every ballroom, every whispered conversation in England for a generation. This is the story of Tom Williamson, Duke of Hawthorne, a man who did the unforgivable, and then spent the rest of his life trying to become someone worthy of being forgiven. This is the story of Caitlin, a woman who survived things that would have destroyed anyone else, who raised a son alone, who worked in silence, who carried a secret that was never hers to carry. And this is the story of what happens when the truth, long buried, long hidden, long denied, finally claws its way to the surface. Stay with this story, because the ending will stay with you. If you have ever believed that people cannot truly change, this story will challenge that. And if you have ever had to forgive the unforgivable, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here. Now let us go back to the beginning. Tom Williamson became the Duke of Hawthorne at the age of 19, when his father died of a fever that moved faster than anyone expected. He inherited everything overnight: the title, the estate, the debts, the responsibility, the portrait gallery full of stern ancestors who seemed to watch him from their frames with collective disappointment. He was not ready. He knew it. Everyone knew it, but no one said so, because dukes are not told uncomfortable truths. They are handed ledgers and told to sign where the steward points. Tom learned quickly. He learned to manage accounts, to speak in Parliament, to wear the correct expression at the correct moment. He learned to be efficient. He learned to be cold. He learned that indifference was the safest armour a man in his position could wear. He married Paige Harlow at 23. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, designed to impress, built to be admired, not to be understood. Their courtship was brief, their wedding was grand. Their marriage was, from the very first week, a performance. Paige wanted the title. Tom wanted an heir. They understood each other perfectly and liked each other not at all. Their son Elliot arrived a year later. Tom held the boy exactly once in the hospital room, handed him back to the nurse and returned to his study. He was not a cruel father. He was simply an absent one. Present in the house, absent in every way that mattered. This was Tom Williamson, Duke of Hawthorne at 30 years old. Efficient, cold, empty, and entirely unaware that somewhere in the north of England, a woman was raising his son in a 2-room cottage with a leaking roof and a love so fierce it could have burned the whole country down. He saw her on a Tuesday. He had travelled north to visit his oldest friend, Duke Lucas Richardson of Blackmore. They had known each other since boyhood, the kind of friendship built on shared misery at school, maintained through habit and whiskey, and the occasional week of hunting on each other's land. Blackmore Estate was vast and cold and beautiful, the way northern England always was. Like something that had decided long ago it had no interest in being comfortable. Tom arrived in the afternoon and spent the first evening doing what he always did at Blackmore, drinking too much of Lucas's whiskey and saying very little. On the second morning, he stood at the window of his guest room and watched the courtyard below. She moved like someone who had never been given the luxury of moving slowly. She was carrying a stack of linens, taller than was sensible, walking fast, redirecting a younger servant with a single word, catching a dropped basket with her foot before it hit the ground, all without breaking stride. Her hair was escaping its pins. Her dress was plain wool, worn at the elbows. Her hands, he could see, even from a distance, were the hands of someone who worked. She was not beautiful. Not in the way Tom had been trained to notice beauty, but there was something about the way she moved through that courtyard. Something in the efficiency of it. Something in the way she solved 3 problems in the time most people solved none. He watched her for the rest of that day, and the day after, and the day after that. On the 3rd evening, he asked Lucas about her. Lucas barely looked up from his glass. "That is Caitlin. She works in the kitchens. She owes me a debt. Her mother was sick. I paid for the physician. She has been working it off for years." Tom said, "I want her." Lucas shrugged the shrug of a man disposing of furniture he no longer needs. Take her. She is useful enough. I have no particular use for her beyond labor. Tom told himself he was being practical. He needed someone competent. His household was poorly managed. His housekeeper was old. He needed capable hands. He told himself many things that evening. What he did not tell himself was the truth. That he had watched this woman for 3 days and could not explain why he could not look away. Caitlin was brought to the study that evening. She kept her eyes down when she entered. Her hands were steady at her sides. She did not fidget. She did not speak. Tom studied her the way he studied ledger entries, efficient, detached. He told her she would be transferred to Hawthorne Manor. She would have a room. She would be paid. She would manage certain household duties under the direction of his housekeeper. She nodded once. Thank you, Your Grace. Then she looked up, and for one unguarded moment something moved across her face. A flash of recognition so quick, so complete, that it was there and gone before Tom could name it. He noticed it. He filed it away under things that did not require investigation and moved on. He did not recognize her. He had no reason to. He had forgotten her completely. What Tom Williamson did not know, what he had buried so deep he had genuinely convinced himself it had never happened, was this. 11 years earlier, at a party at Blackmoor, drunk on Lucas's father's wine, and the particular arrogance of young men who have never been told no, he had followed a girl into the garden by the orchard wall. She was 15. She was a servant's daughter. She had been at the party to help with the serving, small hands carrying trays, eyes down, invisible the way servants were supposed to be invisible. He had thought she was willing. He had told himself she was willing. Later, when the memory surfaced in the dark hours of the night, he pushed it down. Men of his class told themselves such stories all the time. It was easier than the alternative. She had not been willing. She had said no. He had not listened. She had cried, quietly, the way someone cries when they have already understood that crying will not help. He had walked back into the party, poured himself another glass. By morning, he had almost entirely forgotten. Caitlin had not forgotten. Caitlin had never forgotten a single second of it. 9 months later, alone 18 miles from the nearest town, she had given birth to a boy. She had named him Samuel. She had held him in the lamplight in that small room and made him a promise so fierce it had no words, only the feeling behind it. The feeling of a woman who has had everything taken from her and found, in spite of that, one thing that is entirely her own. She had never told anyone who Samuel's father was. She had never spoken his name in connection with her son. She had kept it like a stone in her chest for 11 years, and she had built her life around it, and she had survived. And then the Duke of Hawthorne had come to Blackmoor and pointed at her like she was something to be acquired and said, "I want her." And she had come, because she had no choice, because women like Caitlin never had a choice. Hawthorne Manor was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The house was large and well-maintained and entirely without warmth. The staff moved quietly. The rooms were clean. The fires burned efficiently. And the Duchess ruled over all of it with the particular cruelty of a woman who understands that small humiliations are harder to name and harder to fight than large ones. Paige Williamson looked at Caitlin on the first morning and understood, with the instinct of a woman who has spent her entire life assessing threats, that this was not a simple servant. She could not have said why she felt it. There was nothing obvious. Caitlin was plain. Caitlin was quiet. Caitlin kept her eyes down and her head down and asked for nothing. But Paige gave her the hardest work, the heaviest loads, the longest hours, the smallest room at the end of the coldest corridor. She watched for a reaction. She did not get one. Caitlin worked. She worked with the same efficiency she had always worked with, because the work had to be done, and complaining was a luxury she had never been able to afford. The other servants watched her with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. The new girl the Duke had brought from nowhere. No family, no history, no past. Tom was indifferent. He passed her in the corridor some mornings, barely noticed her presence. She kept her eyes down. He kept his eyes forward. 2 people in the same house, carrying between them a secret that could destroy both their lives, and neither of them speaking of it. Then the letter came. It arrived on a grey Wednesday morning. A servant from the village brought it to the kitchen, and Caitlin held it in her hands for a long moment before she opened it. Her mother was dead. She had known it was coming. Her mother had been ill for months. The illness that Lucas had paid the physician for. The illness that had put Caitlin in debt in the first place. But knowing something is coming does not prepare you for the moment it arrives. She read the letter twice. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor, still in her apron, and pressed her hand over her mouth. Samuel was alone. He was 10 years old. He was in that cottage with a dead woman and no one else. No father, no grandparents, no aunts or uncles. No one in the world except his mother, who was standing in someone else's kitchen, 40 miles away, unable to breathe. She had never told anyone about Samuel. She had hidden him the way you hide something precious and shameful and entirely your own. She had sent money when she had it. She had written letters. She had told herself she was protecting him. And perhaps she was. And perhaps she was protecting herself from the questions that would follow. But now there was no more time for protection. She had to choose. Leave him to an orphanage or tell the truth. She did not take long to decide. She had never been capable of leaving Samuel to anything. That evening she found Tom in his study. She had never sought him out before. She had always waited to be summoned. That was how things worked in a house like this. Servants did not approach dukes. Servants waited. She knocked. She entered when he said to enter. She stood in front of his desk. He looked up, mildly annoyed at the interruption, mildly curious at who had interrupted it. She got on her knees. She said, "Your Grace, my mother has died. My son is alone. He is 10 years old and he has no one. I am asking, I am begging, if he could be brought here to live with me." Tom looked at her for a long moment. He said nothing for long enough that she thought the answer was going to be no. Then he said, "Bring him." Just that. "Bring him." She stood up. She said, "Thank you, Your Grace." She walked out of the study and back to the kitchen, and she stood over the sink with the water running cold over her hands for 3 full minutes before she trusted herself not to cry. Samuel arrived 2 weeks later. He was small for his age, dark-haired, quiet. He had his mother's eyes, watchful and careful, the eyes of a child who had learned early that the world required your full attention. He arrived holding a small bag in his mother's hand and saying nothing. Tom's son Elliot was 8. He was a boy who had been given every material thing a child could want and denied. By the simple absence of his parents, the one thing that mattered most. He was lonely in the specific, painful way of children who have been given toys instead of time. He found Samuel in the courtyard the next morning, sitting alone in the dirt, drawing with a stick. Elliot stood over him and said, "What are you drawing?" Samuel did not look up. "A horse." Elliot studied it. "That does not look like a horse." Samuel looked up then and met this strange boy's eyes and said with perfect calm, "You draw one then." Elliot drew one. It was considerably worse. Samuel laughed. It was the first time he had laughed since his grandmother died. Elliot laughed too, startled and delighted. They were inseparable after that. Tom watched them from windows. He noticed. He could not help noticing. His son, privileged and lonely, and this quiet, dark-haired boy from nowhere, running through the grounds together like brothers. Like they had always known each other. Like the world made more sense with the other in it. He also noticed Caitlin. Not the way he had watched her at Blackmore. Something different now. Something that had no clean name. He watched the way she looked at Samuel. The way her whole face changed when she watched him play. The way she sometimes stood at the kitchen window just to see him in the courtyard, not calling him, not interrupting, just watching. Her son exists with a love so completely visible, it made Tom's chest do something strange. He did not know why he could not look away. He did not ask himself the question directly. He was not that honest with himself yet. It was a Tuesday evening in November when he said the thing that could not be unsaid. He had been drinking. Not drunk, not completely, but enough. Enough that the careful indifference he usually wore had loosened at the edges. He had been going over accounts, and the accounts had not been satisfying, and he had walked into the kitchen, for reasons he could not have fully explained, and found Caitlin there alone, scrubbing a pot at the end of a day that had already been 14 hours long. He looked at her and thought about the boy in the courtyard, about the way Samuel had no father, about the way Caitlin had appeared at Blackmore with a debt to pay and no explanation, and a past she clearly kept sealed. And something cold and sharp came out of his mouth before he could stop it. "A child out of wedlock, no husband, no explanation, you are no better than a whore." The words hit the air of the kitchen and sat there. Caitlin stopped scrubbing. She did not turn around. The pot was still in her hands. Her back was to him. He could see the slight change in her spine, the way the shoulders settled, the way the body prepares itself for something it has been preparing for a very long time. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, completely steady. And there was something in it that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. "You want to know who his father is, Your Grace? You want to know why I have no husband, no family, no one?" She turned. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry, her jaw was tight. Her face had the expression of a woman who has rehearsed this moment so many times she has moved past fear into something harder. "Ask yourself what you were doing at Blackmoor nearly 11 years ago." His stomach dropped. "Ask yourself if you remember a girl by the orchard wall." He went pale. "I was 15, Your Grace. You were drunk." I said, "No, you did not hear me." She picked up her pot. She walked away. Out of the kitchen and down the corridor, her footsteps steady and unhurried. Tom stood alone in the kitchen. The fire was burning low. The room smelled of soap and something sweet. Somewhere outside, a horse shifted in the stable, and the memory came back, not all at once, in pieces. The way our memories return when you have spent years refusing to let them surface. The garden at Blackmoor, the dark, the wine, a girl, small, young, and the way she had turned her faces away, the sounds she made. He had told himself for 11 years that she had been willing. He stood in the kitchen at Hawthorne Manor and understood, for the first time, with no wall between himself and the truth, that she had not been. He had raped a 15-year-old girl. He had left her there. He had gone back to the party. He had forgotten her name within a week. And she had borne his child alone and worked off a debt to the man who had housed her while she did it, and then been handed to Tom Williamson like furniture. Brought into his house, assigned the hardest work, called a whore by the very man who had made her life what it was. He sat down on the kitchen floor. He put his face in his hands. And for the first time in his adult life, Tom Williamson, Duke of Hawthorne, wept. If this story has found a place in your chest and you cannot look away, you are exactly who this channel is for. Hit subscribe right now and leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. Tell me what you feel. Your words matter here. Now let us continue. He wrote to Lucas the next morning. He asked for records, dates, anything. He asked if Lucas knew, if anyone knew, if there had been talk, if there had been a child. Lucas wrote back within a week. The letter was short. Brief in the way letters are brief when the writer is ashamed of what they know, and have always known. The boy's age matched. The dates matched. The location matched. Caitlin had never accused anyone. She had never spoken of a father. She had only worked her debt in silence and asked for nothing. Tom read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it. Then he put it in the drawer of his desk and stared at the wall for a long time. He thought about what he had taken from her. Her innocence. She had been 15. Her childhood. She had become a mother before she had finished being a girl. Her reputation. She had been called a whore by her own neighbours for bearing a child with no husband, never knowing or not being able to say that the man responsible was a duke who had been too drunk and too entitled to hear the word no. Her future. Every door that closes for an unmarried mother. Every position refused. Every room she was not welcome in. And then, as if that were not enough, Tom himself had taken her from the home she had built, had brought her into his house, had watched her work herself half to death, and then had called her a whore to her face in his own kitchen. He had done this, every piece of it. He had done this. He needed to tell someone. He did not know why. Perhaps because carrying it alone for even one more day felt impossible. Perhaps because he needed to hear himself say it aloud to understand that it was real. He told Paige that night. He sat across from her in the drawing room and told her everything. The party at Blackmoor, the girl, what he had done, the boy Samuel, his son. Paige listened. She did not cry. She did not rage. She absorbed the information with the stillness of a woman who is already calculating. When he finished, she rose. She walked to him. She kissed his cheek. She told him not to worry. Something in the gentleness of it made Tom uneasy. But he was tired and ashamed, and he told himself she was being gracious. She was not being gracious. She was thinking. 3 days later, Samuel disappeared. He was there at breakfast. He was gone by noon. No note, no witness, no trace. It was as if the boy had simply ceased to exist. Caitlin's scream when she understood he was gone was not the scream of a woman who has misplaced something. It was the sound that comes from a place below language. The sound of a mother who has had the only thing she had left taken from her. Tom found her in the courtyard, on her knees, screaming Samuel's name into the cold air until her voice cracked and gave out entirely. He knelt beside her in the dirt. He did not touch her. He did not know how to touch her. He did not know what to say. He said nothing. He just stayed, and then he began to investigate. He had people. He had money. He had the resources of a dukedom at his disposal, and he used all of them. Within 48 hours, the shape of what had happened began to emerge. Paige had hired men, not to harm the boy. That would have been too obvious, too traceable. She had hired men to take him quietly to a cottage 2 counties away and keep him there, because Paige had understood, in the way that clever, ruthless women understand such things, that Samuel was not simply a servant's child. Samuel was the Duke's firstborn son. Samuel was older than Elliot. And if that truth became known, if it was ever legally recognized, Elliot's claim to the inheritance would be challenged. Paige's entire life, her title, her position, her future, rested on Elliot's legitimacy. Samuel's existence threatened all of it, so she had made Samuel disappear. Tom found her in her chambers. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. He was not shouting. He was not shaking. He was completely still in the way that a man is still when he has passed through rage and come out the other side into something colder and more permanent. He said, "You had a child taken." Paige looked at him. She was still beautiful. She was always still beautiful. She said, "I protected my son. He is 10 years old. He is terrified. You took him from his mother." "I took him from a complication. Tell me where he is." And then Paige did the thing she had been holding in reserve. The thing she had been planning since the evening Tom had sat across from her and confessed his sins. She rose. She walked toward him slowly. She smiled. "You want the boy back? Then let me make something very clear." She stopped inches from his face. "You try to divorce me. You try to claim that boy, and I will go to the ton. I will go to the newspapers." Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "I will tell them how the great Duke of Hawthorne raped a 15-year-old girl, how he got her with child, how he called her a whore. Your reputation will be ruined. Your title will be stripped. You will be nothing." The fire crackled in the hearth. Tom looked at her for a long time. Something moved across his face. She expected fear. She expected calculation. She expected the look of a man working out how to negotiate his way through the trap. She did not expect what she saw. He lifted his head. His eyes were not afraid. They were resolved. "Then destroy me." Her smile faltered. "Take me to the ton. Tell them everything. I will not deny it. I will not hide from it." He took one step closer. She took one step back. "I was a monster. I did a monstrous thing. And I have spent 11 years not answering for it." His voice cracked, just slightly, but it held. "But I will not let that boy pay for my sins. Not anymore." He turned. He walked toward the door. Paige's voice came after him, stripped of softness now, raw and furious. "You are nothing without your title." He stopped. He did not turn. "Then I will be nothing. But I will have my son." He walked out. Samuel was found 3 days later, a small cottage 2 counties away, cold, scared, hungry. A little boy sitting in the dark asking the men who guarded him when his mother was coming. Tom brought him back himself. He did not send a servant. He rode out at dawn, and he brought the boy home with his own hands, and he walked Samuel into the kitchen where Caitlin was waiting, and he stepped back and let her gather her son into her arms, and he watched her hold him like she was holding the whole world, and he did not look away. He did not deserve to watch it. He watched anyway, because he needed to understand completely, fully, without the protection of distance, what his choices had cost this woman. He needed to carry that weight with his eyes open. He called the gathering of the ton 1 week later. The invitations went out under the Duke of Hawthorne's seal. Every significant family in England received one. No explanation was given. The nature of the gathering was described only as a matter of importance. The ballroom at Hawthorne Manor filled on a Thursday evening with the most powerful and curious people in England, 300 of them, dressed in their finest, whispering to each other, speculating, trying to decode what could possibly require this kind of assembly. Tom stood at the front of the room alone. He waited until the last murmur died, until 300 people were looking at him in silence. Then he spoke. "I have not called you here to celebrate." The room was perfectly still. "I have called you here to confess." The whispers erupted. He let them run. Then they died again. Nearly 11 years ago, at a party at Blackmore, I did something unforgivable. There was a girl. She was 15 years old. I was drunk. She said no. I did not listen. Someone in the crowd gasped. Then silence again, the silence of 300 people who have stopped breathing. She bore a child, my child, a boy named Samuel. I did not know, or rather I chose not to know. I buried what I had done so deep inside myself that I convinced myself it had never happened, that she had been willing, that it had been nothing. He looked down at his hands. The hands of a man who had signed documents, managed estates, shaken the hands of kings. But it was not nothing, and she has carried that knowledge alone for 11 years, while I lived in comfort. While I sat in this house, in this title, untouched by the consequences of what I did. His voice broke. He let it break. He did not try to hold it. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I am not asking for mercy. I am simply telling you the truth. Because the truth is the least I owe her. He looked toward the back of the room. Caitlin stood in the shadows near the door. She had not known he would do this. She had been told only that the Duke required all staff to be present for a household announcement. She stood with Samuel beside her, his small hand in hers, both of them very still. Tom walked toward her. The crowd parted without being asked. 300 people moved aside for the Duke of Hawthorne, walking through his own ballroom toward the woman he had destroyed. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her face, at the tears streaming silently down her face. At Samuel, who was looking up at him with eyes so familiar it was like looking in a mirror he had spent 11 years refusing to find. Tom Williamson, Duke of Hawthorne, dropped to his knees. Caitlin, I took your innocence. I took your childhood. I took your son. I brought you here like property and called you a whore. I gave you 11 years of silence when you deserved 11 years of justice. His voice was barely above a whisper now, but in the absolute silence of the ballroom, it carried to every corner. I cannot give back what I stole. I cannot undo what I did. But I can stand here, in front of every person in England who matters to my world, and tell the truth. And I can beg. I can beg you to believe that the man in front of you is not who he was. I am begging you. He could not continue. He bowed his head. The room was silent. Somewhere in the crowd a woman was crying, quietly. The way Caitlin had cried 11 years ago, in the dark, alone. Caitlin looked at this man on his knees in front of her. This man who had taken everything. This man who had spent 11 years as her oppressor, without even knowing her name. This man who had just destroyed his own reputation in front of 300 people to give her the truth. She thought about what forgiveness was. Whether it was something that could be given in a single moment, or whether it was something longer, slower, whether it was something she even owed him. She did not know the answer, but she reached down, she touched his head. Just once, just lightly, her fingers against his dark hair. It was not forgiveness, not yet, not completely. But it was a beginning. This is the moment. This is the moment in this story that will stay with you longest. If your heart is full right now, if something in this story has reached you, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Tell me what you felt in this moment. Tell me what Caitlin's touch meant to you. This channel exists for exactly this. For stories that reach you in places you did not know you needed to be reached. After that night, everything in the house changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Change, when it is real, does not arrive like thunder. It arrives the way spring arrives in England. Slowly, quietly, a few degrees at a time, until one morning you look up and realize the ground has thawed. Tom did not hide from Caitlin. He had spent 11 years hiding. He was done with it. He sought her out in small ways. He asked about Samuel. He learned that the boy loved horses and hated arithmetic and drew everything he saw in a small sketchbook he kept in his coat pocket. He started reading to Samuel in the evenings, sitting in the kitchen, while Caitlin worked nearby, his voice low and steady, the boy leaning against his arm with the easy trust of a child who has decided to extend it. He taught Samuel to ride. He stood in the stable yard on cold mornings and watched his son on horseback and felt something so large he had no word for it. Not pride, exactly. Something older than pride. Something that had been waiting 11 years to exist. With Caitlin, he was patient. He did not push. He did not assume. He understood with a clarity that came from finally seeing himself honestly, that he had no rights here, that whatever he might be allowed was a gift, not an entitlement. He simply showed up, every day, in every small moment, proving, not with words, because words were cheap and he had used too many of them badly, but with action, that he was trying to become someone else. She watched him. She could not help watching him. She had spent 11 years constructing a very clear image of who Tom Williamson was. Cold, indifferent, capable of the worst. That image was not wrong. It was entirely accurate. But it was becoming, slowly and against her will, incomplete. Then the investigation found something else. Tom had been looking into Paige, into the night Samuel was taken, into the full mechanism of what she had done. His solicitors had been thorough. They had followed every thread. And one thread led somewhere Tom had not expected. Elliot was not his son. The letters were in a locked box in Paige's dressing room. She had been careful. She had been careful for 8 years, but not careful enough to destroy every letter. Not careful enough to burn the ones from Lord Marcus Gray, a neighbour, a man who had been a regular visitor to Hawthorne Manor for years, always during Tom's absences, always leaving before Tom returned. The letters were unambiguous. The dates were unambiguous. Elliot's real father had been living 20 miles away for the entirety of the boy's life. Tom sat with this information for a long time. He thought about Elliot, about the boy's laugh, which he had heard so rarely, and which sounded nothing like his own, about Elliot's hands, which were not his hands, about the small ways he had always felt, without examining the feeling, that there was a distance between himself and his son that effort could not close. He was not Elliot's father. He had spent 8 years as a cold, absent father to a boy who was not his, while his actual son grew up in a cottage 40 miles away drawing horses in the dirt. He confronted Paige. She laughed. The same laugh she had given him when he came for Samuel. The laugh of a woman who believes she has already won. But the letters were already with his solicitors. And Marcus Gray, when approached, confessed everything immediately, with the speed of a man who has been carrying a secret for 8 years and is fundamentally relieved to put it down. Paige was arrested. The charges were clear. The kidnapping of a child, fraud in the matter of Elliot's parentage, conspiracy. The ton, which had spent the week since Tom's confession in a state of collective shock, now had something new to absorb. The Duchess of Hawthorne had taken a child to protect an inheritance claim based on a lie. Paige was exiled to France, her title stripped, her fortune gone. She left England on a grey morning with 2 trunks and the ruined architecture of everything she had constructed. Tom divorced her. Marcus Gray took Elliot to the countryside. He was, whatever else he was, Elliot's father, and the boy needed a father. Tom made sure the arrangements were generous. He made sure Elliot would want for nothing. Elliot cried when he left Hawthorne Manor. He stood in the courtyard with his small bag and cried with the wholehearted grief of a child who does not yet know how to portion his feelings. Samuel stood beside him. He put his arm around Elliot's shoulders. He did not say anything. He just stood there. They cried together. 2 boys who had found brotherhood in a courtyard where they had no business finding it, and were now being separated by the machinery of adult decisions they had no part in making. Tom watched them. He did not intervene. Some things had to be felt fully to be survived. 1 year passed. Tom and Caitlin did not have a single dramatic conversation in which everything was resolved. That is not how forgiveness works, and neither of them was the kind of person who believed it did. What they had instead was time. Time in which Caitlin watched Tom read to Samuel every evening without being asked. Time in which Tom watched Caitlin turn Hawthorne Manor from a cold, efficient machine into something that felt, for the first time in its history, like a home. Time in which they argued twice, because Caitlin was not a woman who hid her opinions, and Tom was not yet fully a man who knew how to hear them, and both times it was Tom who came back and said he had been wrong. Time in which Samuel began slowly to look at Tom without the wariness, to accept his presence, to reach for it, sometimes. Time in which Tom fell in love with Caitlin in the slow, irreversible way that is the only kind of love that lasts. Not in spite of knowing what he had done to her, not by pretending the past had not happened, but with the full weight of it present, with the knowledge that the best he could do was become someone who deserved her trust, even if he never fully deserved her forgiveness. He asked her to marry him on an evening in October. They were in the garden. The light was going gold and low. Samuel was somewhere in the stable, arguing happily with the groom about the correct feeding schedule for the grey mare. Tom said, "I know what I am asking. I know what I have no right to ask. I am not asking you to forget. I am not asking you to pretend. I am asking if you are willing to build something with me, knowing everything that I am and everything that I have been, and if you are not, I understand. I will make sure you and Samuel are provided for. I will make sure you want for nothing. But I had to ask. Caitlin looked at him for a long time, then she said yes, just that, yes. He reached for her hand and held it, and she let him, and they stood there in the October garden while the light went, and neither of them said another word. The wedding was in December. Tom had wanted it large, he had wanted the ton, he had wanted everyone. Caitlin had said, why? He had said, because I want everyone to see. Because I want there to be no room anywhere in England for the story that you are something less than what you are. You are the Duchess of Hawthorne. I want that to be witnessed. She had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had nodded. The church was filled with white roses. Caitlin had mentioned them once in passing months ago. She had not expected him to remember. She had not yet fully understood that Tom Williamson now forgot nothing she said. Samuel walked her down the aisle. He was 11 now, taller than he had been, still quiet, still watchful, still drawing everything he saw in the sketchbook in his coat pocket. He wore a new coat and his mother's hand in his, and he walked with the bearing of a boy who knew exactly what this moment meant. Elliot was there. He had come from the countryside with Marcus, who stood at the back of the church with the expression of a man who understands exactly how many of his debts can never be repaid. Elliot stood with Samuel in the front row, shoulders touching, still brothers in the only way that had ever mattered. Tom waited at the altar. When Caitlin appeared in the doorway in silver, her hair pinned but already beginning its escape, her hands rough, her face not beautiful in the way of duchesses, he began to cry. He did not try to stop it. He had spent too many years stopping things. She walked toward him down the aisle, and he watched her come, and he thought about the orchard wall, and the kitchen, and the ballroom floor, and the October garden, and all the years between those moments, all the loss, all the cost, all the distance that had to be crossed to arrive here, and he let the tears come freely. She reached him. She looked at his face. Something moved in her expression. Something that was not quite a smile, but lived in the same place. The vicar began. When he reached Tom's vows, Tom's voice was barely under control. I do, and I will spend every day of my life proving that I am worthy of her. Caitlin laughed. A wet, surprised, joyful sound that filled the church like light. When it was her turn, she looked at Tom. She took a breath. I do, because he is not the man who hurt me. He is the man who chose to become someone else. Tom sobbed, openly, completely, without apology. The vicar pronounced them husband and wife. Tom kissed her with a desperation that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with gratitude. Samuel cheered. Elliot whistled. Several women in the congregation wept. When Caitlin pulled back, she touched his face. She looked at him. Her eyes were wet. She said quietly, only for him, you asked for my forgiveness. I am not sure I can give it, not all of it, not yet. He nodded. He would have nodded at anything she said in that moment. But I can give you this. I can give you today. And tomorrow. And every day after that, he said, that is more than I deserve, she said. Then earn it. And he smiled. A real smile. The first real smile she had ever seen on his face. The smile of a man who has been given something he did not deserve and has decided to spend the rest of his life being grateful for it. Every day, he said, until I die. She kissed him again. The crowd applauded. Samuel threw his arms around both of them and buried his face between them and held on. There is something worth sitting with at the end of this story. Tom Williamson was not redeemed by being a good man. He was not redeemed because he eventually had good intentions. He was redeemed by choice. By the specific, costly, daily choice to stop hiding from what he had done and to let the truth burn away everything that was not worth keeping. His title, his reputation, his comfortable story about the past, he gave all of it up willingly. Not because he was noble, because he had finally, at great cost, become honest. And Caitlin had never needed anyone to rescue her. She had survived everything. She had raised her son alone. She had carried a truth that was not hers to carry, and had done it with a dignity that put every person in that ballroom to shame. She did not forgive Tom because he deserved it. She forgave him, slowly, incompletely, because she chose to. Because she decided that she had given enough of her life to what had been done to her, and she wanted to give the rest of it to something she chose. That is not weakness. That is the bravest thing a person can do. Some people come into our lives and take things we can never get back. And we are left to decide what we do with the space where those things used to be. Whether we fill it with stone, or whether eventually we let something else grow there. Caitlin chose to let something grow, and that choice, more than anything else in this story, is what made her a duchess. Not the title, not the wedding, not the white roses or the silver dress. The choice. If this story reached you, if you watched all the way to the end, then you already know why this channel exists. It exists for stories like this one. Stories about people who broke and were broken, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation, built something from the pieces. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Leave a comment below, and tell me the one moment in this story that stayed with you. Was it the kitchen? Was it the ballroom? Was it Samuel walking his mother down the aisle? Was it Caitlin's final words? Tell me. Your words matter here. Every single comment is read. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Someone who is carrying something heavy. Someone who has been waiting for proof that people can change. Someone who needs to be reminded that survival is its own kind of grace. This is Forbidden Secret Love Chronicles. The best is still ahead. Welcome to the family.